did you normally get sound from the back of that PC to?
Well, there's wires going here from the PC.
Sound?
Yeah.
The room got really quiet.
Good.
What?
Alright.
I unfortunately don't know.
Why is there constantly empty left?
Do you need audio cues for it?
Yeah. I need to be able to hear.
We're gonna go.
I mean, if you could probably run TasBlock now, because
It's like 45 minutes. I thought you wanted to
it's
go
like 15.
before 1 if possible.
Man, it doesn't matter to me. I'm here till 2.
You're here till 2?
Yeah, at least.
Where you have two people cutting it really close.
That doesn't matter to me.
We're set up for task block, so if you need more time to set up, we could just run task block.
Run task log.
I think people just want to see something happen. So
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah, just let us have
Task
it.
block. Go for it.
there's only one problem. He stole my monitor. So I'm going to do this completely blind.
Still your monitor? It should be on the PC, on the TV.
No,
well,
the
you
programming
see,
part.
in order to tell Rob what to play, I have to be able to see the screen. But that's okay.
So blindfold the task block.
I can do this blind. Let's see how good I am. I'm going to try to do it blind.
Blindfold task block height.
Where's the blindfold?
All right. Hi, I'm Dwango AC. This is a Rob with a board made by True connected to a Raspberry Pi, and this should be Zelda. Nope. I didn't do it blind. Or I didn't plug in the controller cable. That's also a possibility. Okay. Try one more time. Otherwise, I'm going to need the video so I can see what's going on. Yeah, got no idea what's going on.
So flip the video off.
Well, now won't the,
We just need to get the audio working and then you guys can do the audio.
Yeah.
well, I mean, won't those wires over there interfere, or no?
Nothing's crossing.
No, the wire that's going over to that's just for the display.
Yeah, I guess.
That's the right one.
So
I was trying to do Zelda too.
Probably not.
Sweet. Yeah! The bonus stream is officially underway. With only one caveat, if it doesn't make it past the continue and save screen, then I have to restart and mess with controller cables. But it made it, so.
Yay!
All right, are we officially on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now explain.
I'll actually explain what the heck is going on here. Now, first of all, okay, I didn't even get a chance to introduce myself last time. I am Dwango AC from TAS Videos. I opted to come and represent the TAS Videos community. TAS Videos is a website that makes what are called tool-assisted speedruns. Somebody wants to turn the TV down a bit, we can. Yeah, just a couple notches. A tool-assisted speedrun is very, very different from a real-time run. In a tool-assisted speedrun, you're spending hours and hours and hours of time ahead of time walking through the game to complete it as perfectly as possible, using tools such as emulators with slow motion, frame advance, and save states that you can back up to in order to complete the game as perfect as possible. What we're watching right now is Legend of Zelda 1, played with 2 controllers. The second controller is hooked up so that it can continue and quickly warp back to the beginning of the dungeon, as you saw here. There are a number of tricks that are in this game that can be done by a skilled real-time runner. But the luck manipulation you see here, where he drops exactly what he wants and is able to cluster enemies in the center of the screen, is something that's usually only possible in a tool-assisted speedrun, where you can manipulate enemy movements by your own control. I can get louder,
Projection.
or I can get closer to a mic. That would work too. That works. Thank you. What's up? You can hook me up to a lab, I don't mind.
I'm not risking labs this time.
I don't blame you.
Why are they here?
Because the lab screw up with the... So, did you explain why the run failed last time?
Yes, I need to explain, first of all, why Gradius failed in the first place and why we don't have it now. Why we don't have it now, the person who had the cartridge went home. So, as far as why it failed last time, we had run it maybe a half dozen times or more before we ever came into this room. And when we set up in this room, for whatever reason, it failed at very, very close points, but not exactly the same point. And when I went back to review what had happened, it appears it happened right after the audience clapped. and we noticed that the microphone cables were all drug right over the top of the controller cables, which probably caused interference that caused it to desynchronize. Now, if you were a human player, you probably wouldn't even notice that anything was different, but a single frame that's different on here will cause a different result. So, for example, here in Legend of Zelda, one of the things that's happening here is extremely precise enemy manipulation, where you're able to control enemies by what buttons you press. So maybe you'll go a frame left, 1/60th of a second left sooner than you would have otherwise, and it causes an enemy to drop a bomb when you need it. Or maybe you need to cluster all of the enemies in a room in one location. So as you enter the room, you might hit other buttons in a place where it doesn't matter in order to manipulate the game into giving you a different result. And one of the interesting things about most of the consoles is they aren't really random. The only randomness they have is one of two things: either the amount of time that has passed since the console was started, or the results of whatever button presses the user has pressed. If you have always started exactly at the same time and always press exactly the same buttons, you'll get exactly the same result. And that's what we're seeing here in this Legend of Zelda run, is all of the input is exactly identical. And so we know that assuming an emulator is as accurate as a real console, that it will synchronize. I didn't realize I was that quiet. So I get to hold this thing, huh?
Yes, you get to hold it.
Okay, I don't mind. So this particular run is 22 minutes long, roughly. He uses some interesting routes. You'll see right now he's in Dungeon 4. He's going to do all the dungeons in completely bizarre order. This is a real-time strategy as well, but it's taken a bit extremely in this particular run. Do we have any announcements or donations you want to make?
No, just keep going.
Keep going.
Babble. Everyone wants to know about tasks.
Yes.
Okay. We're not going to be running any Mario games today except for Dr. Mario, but I did want to kind of talk about where the whole tool-assisted speedrun community came from. In, I believe it was 2003, a runner came out with a game of a movie of Super Mario Bros. 3 that was called simply Time Attack out of Japan. And it was not labeled very well. People didn't really know what it was about, but it just completely destroyed Mario 3. And a lot of people were extremely disappointed when they discovered that it was made with slow motion on an emulator, purpose-built to be able to record player actions in what we call a movie file. And so there was a lot of consternation, if you will, a lot of hurt feelings in the real-time speedrunning community because something that was done with tools was passed off as if it were done by a human player with their own real skill. So as a website named NES Videos was developed and finally Task Videos was developed, one of the key things that they did was ensure that at all times any video made with tool-assisted in a tool-assisted manner using emulators with slow motion, save states, things like that, was very, very clearly labeled so as to ensure that anybody watching it knew that they were watching a tool-assisted speedrun. And hopefully here even on stream we're marking this as a task block so that it's clear that this is not a human player doing this. NES Videos originally by its name only did Nintendo videos, but as other emulators became available other than Fantasia to play games with re-recording, emulators for say Sega Genesis and other platforms, they started expanding the site and converted over to Task Videos. At this point, Task Videos has a large collection of tool-assisted speedruns for many different platforms. There are emulators available with tool-assisted utilities and speedrun capabilities on everything from Atari 2600 to 7800, Sega Genesis, all the Nintendo consoles up to even the GameCube and the Wii, believe it or not, through an emulator called Dolphin. We have some limited ability to do tool-assisted speedruns on Windows through an emulator called Hourglass that does Cave Story and a few other specific games. And there are also obscure emulators such as a DOS emulator or a 386 emulator called JPC-RR. It's an entire 386 implementation of a computer inside of a Java platform. It's really rough, but it does work. I did a tool-assisted speedrun of Super Android on that platform a while ago. One other thing that these emulators can be useful for is playing games that are very difficult to get your hands on. For instance, it's extremely difficult to find a copy of Otaki for the Famicom Disk System. and even if you do get a copy, it's not often that it works. So I had a great amount of difficulty hunting one down. I did a speedrun on Ataki that I was able to demonstrate basically playing a side-scrolling auto shooter, but with musical notes. It's a very unusual game. And in that particular game, kind of like the Gradius run we started earlier this week, or actually I should say a week ago now, because it's a side-scroller that moves at a set pace, it would be very boring if you were to play it just normally. So in a tool-assisted speedrun, we can show art. We can take advantage of the fact that we have lots of extra time to do things, and we can move the ship in very dangerous proximity to enemies. In the case of Ataki, you can play actual music that matches up with the background music. So there's a lot of things that you can do on a tool-assisted speedrun you wouldn't normally be able to do in real time. One thing I'd like to highlight is how close the real-time community and the test videos community has become. At one point in time, as I mentioned, there was a lot of animosity between the two groups, but in recent years, the tool-assisted speedrun community has greatly benefited from the route planning from the real-time community, and the real-time community has benefited from the strategies that have been discovered, and tricks that were once thought to only be possible with frame precision on an emulator have actually been performed very successfully here at the Marathon, especially in the case of Mario 64. Mario Kart 64, we saw the TAS doing some pretty crazy things, and then in the real-time run, well, the runner had become so skilled at those frame-perfect glitches that he was able to do the same things. At this point, I would say any animosity that once existed is completely gone. Talking to yourself for an hour is kind of boring. Anybody have any questions?
Yes, actually. Is there any task run that you would like to do that just would take too long to route at the moment? Like any 100% or anything like that?
Well, this is kind of self-serving, but I'm probably working on one of the most complicated tool-assisted speedruns ever known, and that is the game NetHack. NetHack is an extremely complicated game that's been, it's very, very complicated. To give you an idea, we've been working on this run, myself and another person named AIS523. We've been working on this run since approximately August of 2010, and we hope to finish in 2015. Just describing what we've done in the game has required over 32,000 words of explanation, and we're not even done yet. I had to create an entirely new emulator in order to really do it. We wanted to do it for the DOS version of the game NetHack, but the DOS emulator, JPCRR, while usable, is extremely slow. So instead, we were able to take the source code of NetHack, which is open source. We were able to modify the random number sequence, or random number code, to run the same in Linux as we did in DOS. And with that, we were able to create basically a virtual machine in KVM that allows us to use Python scripting going through a serial interface to do luck manipulation. So we can screen scrape the text coming over a serial interface, because NetHack is a text-only game. It's 80 by 24 characters. We can screen scrape, or rather capture, the text that's coming over that serial link and make scripts that can make logical decisions about it. In a very brief digression, I know I'm wandering off from your question a bit, but in the case of NetHack, you start with a single random seed, and then from that point on, all randomness is completely controlled by the movements of the player, and there is an infinite amount of time for you to make your decision of what you want to hit next. So what we've done is created scripts that, for instance, you have an enemy standing in front of you that you want to hit and kill in one hit. So you try to attack him and it doesn't work, you don't get a critical hit. So we wrote a script that, for instance, in this case, you walk against a wall, which randomly erodes an engraving you may or may not be standing on before you use as a turn count, thus advancing the random number generation sequence. So we walk against the wall once, don't get any useful result, reset, have it walk into the wall twice, and so on and so forth until we get the critical text we're looking for, saying, hey, you got a critical hit. And because it's arduous to do that by human skill, we have a bot to do that. We've written multiple scripts for everything from polymorphing to telemorphitis to you name it. We hope to finish in 2015 to show this to the world. In the meantime, You can find some of the description at the NetHack TAS Tools project on Gitorious. We also have a YouTube video that shows our progress so far. It's a little bit hard to follow if you don't know a lot about NetHack, and that's okay. We hope to be able to explain it as the thing goes on. So another good example of a run that can take an extremely long amount of time is the 120 star run of Super Mario 64. And that particular one was worked on by, goodness, how many people worked on that?
80-something, 90-something, a lot.
It was a lot of different people that contributed, and individual people were able to take specific levels and then they were able to hex the input together later. That particular run took over 1 million re-records, a couple of years of development, and it's one of the most challenging runs I think that the site has. It's also one of the most entertaining, so if you ever get a chance, head over to tasvideos.org and look for the 120 star run of Mario 64. It's a really enjoyable watch.
Did you mention BizHog yet?
Ah, yes. So when we run the Gradius run, we invited Adelicat, who's the current site manager for TAS Videos, to come and present on Skype a little bit about TAS Videos. BizHawk is an emulator that Adelicat created to support TAS Videos by giving an emulator that has a common set of tools for multiple platforms. BizHawk is a re-recording capable emulator with multiple cores, including an Atari 2600, 7800 core. We just recently got Nintendo 64 support with better emulation than Muppin. We also have standbys like NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. I believe Sega Genesis is done, I think. I can't remember.
I don't know anything about this.
I think that core is done. BizHawk gives common tools such as memory search. So one of the things that the TAS Videos community has contributed to real-time runners is finding memory addresses where certain values are stored to help people train for real-time runs. So we can use a search tool to look at certain states in memory, find, for instance, the value of the hit points of a boss by doing a diff. For instance, if you know that a value is going to stay the same over time that you want to look at, maybe you're trying to find your run speed in a Mario game, you might sit still and say, okay, search for all values that don't change. And after a few frames, switch the logic and say, okay, look for anything that is moving, and then start your character moving on the screen. That way it eliminates all values that don't meet that criteria. And eventually you can narrow down, through careful use of the search tool, you can narrow down which memory address specifically maps to, say, Mario's run speed. From there you can watch that value and figure out if you're at the maximum speed that Mario can run at. There's all kinds of tricks along those lines that are very useful for emulation development. Did I sufficiently answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fairly sure we just crashed TASVideos.org.
Oh, awesome.
Again?
Again? Yeah, we did that last time too.
Developed for Nintendo 64. No.
I didn't hear that.
You still have 30,000 people during the office watching.
30,000 people. I'll take it. Thank you.
We've got a question from the chat here.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit about the Raspberry Pi and what it actually is?
I can. That's a fantastic question. He's kind of falling over here. So this little Lego box has a Raspberry Pi in it. That's a Raspberry Pi computer made specifically for being a very cheap $35 computer. It has 512 megabytes of memory. It has a 700 megahertz ARM processor in it. It has an SD card for booting off of, an HDMI cable, a few other things. The idea was basically to give school children their own computer that they could hack on. In this case, this Raspberry Pi is a first generation. He only has half the memory. It's a Rev 1 with only 256 megabytes of memory, but you can go to, I believe it's raspberrypi.org, and you can buy a full computer that's this guy here for $35. One of the most common uses for it is as a media center. Because he has an HDMI port on it that can send high-def 5.1 audio out, one of the common uses for a Raspberry Pi is to boot into a distribution such as RaspBMC or another distribution that's called OpenELEC that has the XBMC media center on it. connect that to a TV, and you can watch video content locally or even stream things like YouTube without paying for the high price of a Roku, and still have a fully functional computer that you could use for other purposes. In this case, the Raspberry Pi is doing two things for me. He's got a USB port on him that is connecting to the buffer board that was created by True. Again, that board that's actually connecting to the console is made by somebody named True. He wrote all the code for it and developed the board. You can get your own bot at truecontrol.org. The Raspberry Pi is connecting to that board through USB, but there's also a serial header on that board which we did early development with, and the Raspberry Pi has a full serial interface that we could use to power the board and connect to it for data purposes. So the Raspberry Pi was useful for that. At one point in time, I also had a cable connected to blink the light on the top of Rob's head, but it's not currently connected. Again, you can find more information about a Raspberry Pi at, I believe it's raspberrypi.org. I believe you had a question.
So this is more of a, you said BizHop got Nintendo 64 support, and I know we still can't test DK64, and so DK64 runner, we kind of all want to test that. Do you know if there's going to be like any emulators for Nintendo 64 that may be able to fix the problems, or is that game just going to not ever be emulated?
Questions, just repeat the question before you answer.
So he's curious if the emulation support for Mario 64 will ever improve to the point where it can be tasked at all.
DK64.
I'm sorry, Donkey Kong 64. Thank you. Answer is probably. Some games are far more difficult to emulate than others. Certainly, there are certain games that we cannot task at all right now, just because the emulation support is very poor. And we've seen some of this even on Nintendo's Virtual Console, where some games have not quite been perfect, even with Nintendo's full ability to see the original source code. They still haven't necessarily emulated everything perfectly. As far as when support could happen, it's hard to say. Test Videos is always looking for help with emulation development. If that's something that interests you, head on over again to testvideos.org once it's up, and you'll see an emulators section with all of the emulators the site uses. And they're always looking for developers and beta testers. In the case of BizHawk, BizHawk is using multiple cores. The Nintendo 64 core in particular could use a lot more testing because it's very, very recent. So,
Got a bunch more questions here. Are there any Holy Grail task runs?
there's certainly a lot for certain people. I would say that DK64 is up there.
Okay.
There's some that we would like to get to on platforms that are not yet very well emulated. There is no current support for emulation for platforms like Xbox Original. I can't call it Xbox One anymore because, well, anyway. We don't have any support for Xbox 360 yet. There's minimal support for PS2, if any. It's there, but it's rough. So obviously there's some newer games that we would love to get to that we just can't yet. As far as Holy Grails, everybody has different interests. There's a lot of people who like these older consoles, and for an NES, they're very well emulated, at least as far as doing a tool-assisted speedrun. Console verification is a slightly different story. The games I'm going to show you here were carefully selected of games that synchronize. There are many other games that we cannot show you console verification for because they either rely on uninitialized memory that cause it to desynchronize, or the emulation is not 100% accurate, and so it desynchronizes halfway through the run.
I have a question. I think a big thing is when people hear about tasks, maybe their initial reaction is, oh, it's not hard at all, it's just cheated runs, blah, blah, blah. Could you maybe give a reference for how long some of the tasks actually take to make?
Yeah, well, I certainly talked earlier about how the Super Mario 164 120 star run took over a year and a half to make. We record things, we count the number of re-records it takes. In other words, a re-record is any time that you create a save state, try a difficult section, die, or don't get the result you want, load your save state, so you restore your point in time, and then try again with different input. And games are marked with the number of re-records. A high re-record count usually shows that the author of the run put a lot of effort into it. And there are certain games that have extremely high re-record counts in the tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, and in the case of Mario 120 star, over 1 million. Now, there's some amount of re-records that could be due to automated scripting using a programming language called Lua. BizHawk allows you to write scripts for certain things in the Lua programming language that can rack up the re-records rather significantly. So it's not uncommon to see one re-record number for the number of total attempts, including automation, and another one for manual re-recording. As far as the amount of physical time, a number of hours, it can be extremely long. One thing that separates the real-time runners from the task runners is that oftentimes the skills and the patience required to do a task are very different. Now, we have a lot of people that cross over. We have Tampa, for instance. He very much is as active. Yeah, what the heck? Come yeah.
Yeah, Tampa.
There's Tampa. We like Tampa because he is one of the premier members who has crossed between the real-time and task videos communities, and he can certainly say that it requires very different skills.
Speaking of that, there's a question here about what sort of technical knowledge do tasters need, be it EE, CS, etc.?
So, you really don't need anything. I gotta be honest. Get an emulator, just play around with the re-recording tools, and as long as you are a perfectionist, you will be perfect for doing tool-assisted speedruns. If you're not a perfectionist, please don't submit your runs right away. Post them in the forum first, because you'll get called on it if it's not perfect, if you have a death in your run or something like that. I'm going to hand the mic over to Tampa while I switch games.
I get that, answer that question. A lot of people ask me, how do I test this part, how do I learn how to test and stuff? The first thing I say, never think that what you do is perfect. New people to testing, they make a room, test room and think, oh, this looks good, I keep going. But they will never test a new strategy, a new way to do the same room. And that's what you have to do. You have to come up with that creative thinking and try different things. What?
I'm just telling Wanda to talk like you are, because you're projecting to the mic properly. Don't keep going.
I can get the mic closer,
Okay.
don't worry.
So you keep up to testing different things all the time until you think I can't test anything more in this place. I keep moving. But all tasks can be improved. Many tasks have improved by a single frame, and that's crazy. So just keep on trying the same thing over and over again. I made a task of A Link to the Past a few years back. I spent over 2 weeks in the same room, only to save one single frame. But I managed to do it in there, and I was so happy. I screamed out loud at my computer because it was so nice. So just keep trying.
Okay, so we're going to switch over to Zelda 2, and I'm actually going to hand the mic off to the person who made the run. So, you can introduce yourself.
I can? Oh, hello. My name is Insult, and I made this run that desynced already.
Oh, did we not delete the save game?
You probably left it on the Zelda 1 run.
Good task you made.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Nice. That's not what it's supposed to look like.
No, not at all.
You're going to have to delete that save,
Oh,
probably. You're
So-
probably going to have to delete that save.
We got a question here about handheld tasking. Is it possible to task things like a 3DS?
3DS, I don't know about 3DS, but we certainly have DS support. You can certainly look at the website. We have Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, DS, a few other things like that. But I'm going to switch over to Zelda 2 for the moment.
All right, so you'll notice that Link is moving too fast. What happens is, sort of the main thing going on is when you press left and right at the same time, it will break Link's normal top speed. And usually he moves at 1.5 pixels per frame, but if you do that, you can get him up to 8 pixels per frame. And the game doesn't really keep up properly, the draw doesn't work, but the world still works as normal.